You are listening to Practical and Woo by Mindset and Manifest. My name is Eden, and I invite you to embark on a journey with me to explore the practical and spiritual edges of the unknown for the purpose of allowing you to embody and empower yourself uniquely as you are, and to intentionally create and live a life of freedom and fulfillment. Each week, I am going to discuss topics such as energetics, reality creation, manifestation, astrology, tarot, and more to help empower you to live beyond perceived limitations and to practically design your life so it feels like absolute magic every step of the way. Let's dive in. Well, hello, brilliant soul. Before we begin with today's episode, I just want to bring your attention to a new offering that I have called Starfolio. Starfolio is a digital astrology calendar that allows you to incorporate astrology touch points into your regularly scheduled digital calendar. And so, if this is something of interest to you, please feel free to reach out or take a look at the link in the show notes. Now, let's dive into the episode. There once lived a man who lived in a city that was built entirely out of glass. The buildings were glass, the streets were glass, all of the windows were glass, layered upon glass, and all of it was catching the light and throwing it back at all the passers-by. Even the sky on certain days looked like a polished surface stretched thin over the world. People said the city had been designed this way to inspire clarity, truth, and transparency. Nothing could hide for long in a place like this. The man had not always noticed the glass. He'd grown accustomed to the city being the way it was. At first, it simply felt beautiful. Reflective towers catching the sunrise, shop windows multiplying the colors of passing crowds, calm pools of mirrored stone lining public squares. Yet, over time, something subtle began to trouble him. No matter where he went, he felt watched, not by people, but by himself. Every surface returned him to his own gaze. When he passed storefronts, he caught sight of his posture, slightly hunched, guarded, as though bracing against an invisible wind. When he crossed the plaza at noon, the mirrored ground showed him a man walking with resolve, but no joy in sight. When night fell, the glass towers glistened with iridescence in a mixture of darkness and streetlights. He saw himself fractured into 1,000 versions of himself, each carrying the same quiet tension. At first, he assumed this was coincidence, a trick of the architecture, a side effect of living somewhere so reflective. But the feeling followed him everywhere, even inside trains and lakes that existed outside the city. He was filled with an uncomfortable uneasiness that reminded him of his lack of fulfillment. He felt lackluster in the incessant reflection of himself. Over time, the man grew more and more furious. He was not the man in the reflection. He insisted. He knew he was thoughtful, capable, kind. He had worked hard to become self-aware. He had read books, learned the language, practiced rituals of growth. Yet the world kept showing him a version of himself that felt smaller than he knew himself to be. He began to avoid reflective places. He chose matte walls, dim rooms, heavy fabrics. He walked with his eyes lowered. He rearranged his apartment to minimize glare. And yet, no matter what he did, reflections still found him. It began to feel personal. One evening, while crossing the central square, the man stopped abruptly. Beneath his feet, the glass pavement reflected him clearly, painfully so. He saw his clenched jaw, his rigid stance, the way his shoulders curved inward as though they were protecting something fragile. "That's enough," he thought. He lifted his heel and slammed it down. The glass cracked with a sound like thunder trapped in ice. The fracture spread in a spiderweb pattern beneath him. Gasps rose from nearby pedestrians. Security rushed forward. Yet the man felt a wild electric relief. The reflection had shattered. The image broke apart. At last, the world had stopped showing him his reflection. That night he went home trembling with a sense of victory. But as the next morning rolled in, he woke to the city in complete chaos. Cracks had appeared everywhere, windows splintered, buildings warped, reflections fractured into jagged fragments. The city's glass had begun to fail. Officials declared it a structural anomaly. Engineers blamed temperature shifts. No one spoke of the man in the square. At first he felt vindicated. See, he thought, the glass was flawed. The reflections were unreliable. Our city had been the problem all along. But as the days passed, something stranger occurred. The reflections didn't disappear, even if they were changed. Now, instead of clean surfaces, the man saw himself distorted, elongated, compressed, twisted into unfamiliar shapes. In broken windows, he looked sharp and threatening. In fractured mirrors, his eyes appeared hollow. In pools of shattered glass, his body splintered into disconnected pieces. The more the city repaired its surfaces, the more violently they seemed to distort him. He grew obsessed. He carried stones in his pockets, smashing reflective surfaces wherever he went. Each time he felt a brief rush of control, each time the reflections returned, more unsettling than before. Soon people avoided him. They whispered about the man who could not stand to be seen. The city grew wary. Signs appeared, guards were posted, mirrors were removed from public spaces. Yet the man's inner world grew louder. Without reflections, he began to feel unanchored. His sense of self wavered. He didn't know how he appeared to others, and this uncertainty gnawed at him. He felt unseen, yet overly exposed, all at the same time. He felt invisible, yet constantly judged. One night, wandering beyond the city limits, he came upon a forest unlike any he had seen before. The trees were tall and dark, their bark shimmering faintly as though polished from within. Between them hung countless mirrors suspended by silver threads. Some were as small as hands, others were taller than doorways. He froze in their wake. A figure emerged from between the trees, neither old nor young, neither man nor woman. "You cannot break these," the figure said softly. The man clenched his fists. "I don't want to see myself anymore." The figure tilted their head. "You do not want to see who you believe yourself to be." "I know who I am," he snapped. The figure gestured to the mirrors. "Then walk." Reluctantly, the man stepped forward. Each mirror reflected a different version of him. In one, he was small and apologetic. In another, defensive and sharp. In one, he was distant and cold. In another, desperately trying to be agreeable. Each reflection pulsed with emotion, memory, and sensation. He staggered backwards. "These are lies." The figure shook their head. "These are states." "I want the truth," the man pleaded. The figure replied, "The truth is not an image. It's a frequency of self, who you choose to be on the inside that reflects back to you on the outside." The figure then led him deeper into the forest, where the mirrors changed. Now they reflected moments rather than forms. A childhood room where he learned to stay quiet. A classroom where his curiosity was corrected. A relationship where his needs were dismissed. Each scene shimmered with valuable insight. "You learned to brace," the figure said. "You learned to protect. You learned to contract." The man fell to his knees. "I did not choose this." "No," the figure replied gently, "but you continued it." The mirrors around him softened, becoming translucent pools of light. "Every time you tried to change the world," the figure continued, "you were asking it to stop responding to the version of you that was still running the spell." The man's breath shook. "Spell?" "Yes," the figure said. "Consciousness is a spell cast continuously. Self-concept is the incantation, for the world around you is not the caster itself. but the echo, the reflection. Something in him broke open in that moment, like ice melting beneath the surface. He realized he'd been living as though the world were an enemy witness, recording his failures. He had never questioned the stance from which he stood inside himself. He had tried to dominate the reflection instead of tending to the source. The figure placed a hand over his heart. You cannot destroy the mirror to escape the image. You can only change that which is being reflected. How? He whispered. By staying, the figure replied. By feeling without fleeing. By softening without collapsing. By meeting yourself without telling the story of who you don't want to be. It is from here where the unfavored story will no longer reflect, and instead you will get to see who you really are. The mirrors dissolved, the forest faded. The man woke at dawn lying on the edge of the city, and the glass skyline was glowing gently in the distance. He returned home. The glass surfaces in the city were now repaired, and all of the reflections restored to what they once were before. Yet something inside him had shifted. When the man passed a window, he did not flinch. When he caught his reflection, he turned inward before casting blame upon the reflections he saw. Days passed, then weeks. The reflections changed, not dramatically, but unmistakably. His posture softened, his gaze steady, the bracing eased. The city no longer felt like an accusation, and perhaps this is the great, uncomfortable, liberating truth beneath it all. You cannot change the world by attacking its surfaces. You cannot force reality to respond differently while standing in the same internal stance. You cannot escape your reflection by destroying the mirror. The mirror has never been your enemy. It's been your witness. When your consciousness shifts, the world follows. When the incantation changes, the echo does too. When you meet yourself differently, your life, your reality, responds in kind. Not because the mirror has changed, but because it's always been honest all along. Until next time.